So if you stand up.
Okay, we're going to begin. I would just like to start by welcoming everybody to our ad hoc lecture. And this is Dr. Mauricio Suchowlansky. And he is going to give us a very, very interesting insight into one of the most notorious people who's ever lived, Machiavelli, right? Il Principe. We are the Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, and we want to give Mauricio a very warm welcome. He's a wonderful neighbor, an excellent researcher. He is from the Center for Political Thought, correct? As are you. And welcome to all of you. So without more ado, since the subject is fascinating, Mauricio, I don't know.
All right, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And thanks to everyone for coming out. All right, so as you can see, the long title of my talk is From Inequality to Wonder for Equality, Society and Civil Discourse in Machiavelli's Florentine Histories. Machiavelli composed the Florentine Histories under the commission of Giulio de' Medici, Cardinal, between roughly late 1520 and I think he handed it in by early 1525. This is roughly about 5 years after the completion of the composition of Discourses in Livy, usually thought having completed around 1517, and with the Prince usually thought to have been composed at around 1513. But it's precisely this, so the dichotomy between the early political works, including the Prince of Discourse in Livy, on the one hand, and the Florentine Histories as being one of the later works of Machiavelli that I'm trying to present here. So in recent years, Niccolo Machiavelli's historical and political writings from the 1520s have attracted increased attention. Machiavelli scholars, coming from a wide range of interpretive approaches, have suggested that these late texts, most forcefully the Florentine Histories, reveal a transformation in political reflection that had previously gone unrecognized. Machiavelli's late works are representative of a fundamental conceptual and theoretical rupture with the Republican thought presented in his earlier texts, especially the Discourses in Livy. Informed by the historical context and intellectual tradition of Machiavelli's late writings, this approach expresses what one contemporary interpreter labels a conservative turn in Machiavelli scholarship. In this presentation, I hope to illuminate this conservative turn by introducing and examining Machiavelli's account of the people's actions in the Florentine Histories. Famously, in the Prince and the Discourses, Machiavelli assigns collective qualities to two generally defined classes, or as he calls them, humors, the nobles and the people. Machiavelli ascribes to the nobles the inherent desire to dominate the people, while he assigns the people the wish to live free from the domination of the nobles, which consequently involves the capacity to constrain the destabilizing tyrannical ethos of the elites. These popular interests and agency thus make them indispensable for the safety and maintenance of a prince, or the promotion of freedom and security in a republican context. Contrary to these assumptions, I claim that the Florentine Histories show how Machiavelli became substantially more critical of the people as a sound political agent. Popular groupings are recurrently depicted as politically ambitious, violent, and power-thirsty, to the extreme that Machiavelli's narrative makes it difficult to distinguish between their desires and acts from those the elites are usually found guilty. This critique of popular agency and interests is further substantiated, I believe, by Machiavelli's reconceptualization of these prior distinctions between the two parts present in the city, with Machiavelli both multiplying the divisions and eroding their differences. It is precisely along these lines that one of the most contested and theoretically robust sections of the histories that is, the introductory section to Book 3, substantiates this pessimistic evaluation. Two passages are critical for the sake of my argument. First, Machiavelli declares the grave and natural enmities that exist between the men of the people and the nobles, caused by the wish of the latter to command and the former not to obey, are the cause of all evils that arise in cities. In spite of the allegedly straightforward distinction between the desires of the nobles and the people, Machiavelli subtly transforms his vocabulary concerning popular agency. While we continue to observe this almost instinctive necessity to interpret political life, or in terms of the tension between a binary of classes and their consequent effects, we also notice the absence of conventional Machiavellian notions of popular agency, such as not to be dominated or not to be oppressed. Rather, Machiavelli labels the people's acts as simply not to obey. The second passage, from which the title of the essay comes, pertains to a series of parallels between civil conflicts in the Roman and Florentine contexts. While civil discords led Rome, and I quote, from equality in the citizens to a very great inequality, those in Florence reduced it, and I quote again, from inequality to a wonderful equality, end quote. Machiavelli returns here to the typically Machiavellian vocabulary of the wonderful or the miraculous in order to rationalize and even debunk what is conventionally held as inexplicable or simply taken as common opinion. Of course, if Florence would have become such an exemplar of egalitarianism, one would expect Machiavelli to sympathize and even embrace the city's social transformation. However, as I wish to show throughout this talk, Machiavelli's ironic and detached appreciation suggests that his evaluative standards are surprisingly different from those introduced in his earlier political works. Machiavelli's assertions in this chapter imply, first, that the capabilities and objectives of the people are incompatible with the law-abiding agency strongly associated with Machiavelli's earlier approach to politics. Second, that both parties, the elites and the people, are shown to be agents of domination. And thirdly, popular agency undermines Machiavelli's earlier commitment to freedom as non-domination and civic virtue, themes strongly associated with what's usually called neo-republican interpretations of Machiavelli. In that regard, Machiavelli's altered conceptions of society and civil discourse suggest not only that the Florentine can hardly be evaluated from the vantage point of his previous political and typological considerations, but that his own analysis of power and authority was in need of new concepts and vistas as well. Right. So the analysis that follows supports these conceptual novelties that I've just referred to. I explore the establishment of the popular ordinances of justice of late 13th century, and for the sake of brevity, I'll stop after the rise and fall of Walter of Brienne, the Duke of Athens. Overall, I suggest that the Florentine histories reveal the people as sharing a desire for political domination, at times defined as their preference for tyrannical rule over liberty, license over freedom, extra-legal institutions over legitimate modes of action, and the outright opposition to any liberty-enhancing politics. And by offering this detailed reading of those episodes, I contend that these events are compatible, again, with the so-called conservative turn to Machiavelli scholarship, and unlike recent appreciations, especially as presented by works by Professor John McCormick, Machiavelli's adjectives do match his verbs. Words and deeds actually do refer to the same circumstances. All right, now I'm going to speak about the ordinances of justice of the late 13th century and the role of Giano della Bella. Oh, no, that's just terrible. Oh, well. It's life. So, as the various regime changes of mid-13th century came to a close, Machiavelli tells us only those humors who are still excited that are naturally want to exist in all cities between the powerful and the people. For instance, the people want to live according to laws, and the powerful want to command by them, but it's not possible for them to understand together. The statement is presented in an arguably familiar way, displaying the two social groups driven by opposite interests, with the powerful pursuing the will to dominate, and the people wishing to live according to the laws. Nonetheless, this clear-cut classification of noble and popular agency is dramatically altered with Machiavelli's discussion of this ordinances of justice, the series of laws, and the portrayal of the architect of this anti-noble laws, Giano della Bella. In the wake of some clashes among noble groups, the popular sectors take the opportunity to solidify their position in government with the establishment of the popular-based priors and the creation of a Gonfalonier of justice. The priors and the Gonfalonier are simply an executive college, with the Gonfalonier of justice being the first among equals in late medieval Florence. So Machiavelli prophetically observes, and I quote, "This magistracy was the cause, as we'll see in time, of the ruin of the nobles, because through various accidents they were excluded from it by the people, and afterwards crushed without any respect." With the nobles simply conceding to these procedural and institutional changes, in large part because of their belief that they could overcome popular institutions with violence, the heads of the popular guilds, with the intellectual aid of Giano della Bella, established the ordinances of justice. These laws, briefly, were meant to subject the city's nobles to tougher penalties for crimes against non-elite citizens, and most importantly, to exclude them completely from participating in the political life of the city. Well, these laws, again, were meant to promote some of the most intrinsic qualities of the Republican way of life. The outcome, as we shall see, is far from straightforward. Machiavelli emphasizes two specific features. On one hand, the nobles' disapproval of the newly gained popular power, and the powerful popular leaders' distrust of Giano della Bella's role and objectives therein. As Machiavelli declares, and I quote, "The people acquired much reputation and Giano della Bella much hatred, because the powerful had a very bad opinion of him as the destroyer of their power, and the rich men of the people envied him because it appeared to them that his authority was too great." But there are some features worth, overall, this quote doesn't seem to give us anything new in Machiavelli, but there are some features worth noticing here. First, in spite of his, as Machiavelli calls it, very noble lineage, Machiavelli gives Giano della Bella full credit for the anti-noble laws. Machiavelli portrays Giano as capable of breaking with the constraints of his allegedly natural preference for domination and political power. While Machiavelli highlights Giano's noble ancestry, a theme he had already substantiated by including the Della Bella family in a list of 12 nobles at the beginning of Book 2, he also suggests that Giano della Bella was a lover of freedom of the city, hence blurring the boundaries between noble and popular interests. But this account of Giano's lineage is far from clear, especially if we compare Machiavelli's brief description and those of his textual sources. Giovanni Milani refers to Giano as a talented man of ancient popular noble lineage. He was wealthy and powerful. For Marchione di Coppo Stefani, Giano della Bella was from an ancient popular and honorable family. Whereas for Leonardo Bruni, Bruni declares, although of eminent and famed descent, Giano was of a low and popular family. Whether Machiavelli amends these historical descriptions meaningfully is hard to tell. What is significant, however, is that only Machiavelli presents Giano as a citizen of purely noble wealth extraction, all of which allows him to transform Giano della Bella into an extraordinary and paradoxical political figure. Following the passing of the anti-noble laws, a popular citizen is skilled in a street fight with several nobles, including the powerful nobleman Donati. Since Donati was, as Machiavelli calls him, older than the other nobles, he was brought before the captain of the people, the official in charge of judging Corso according to the provisions of the newly implemented laws. In spite of the general belief concerning Donati's involvement in the affair, the captain absolves him, and as a result, the people decide to take up arms and assemble before the house of the creation of the anti-noble laws, Giano della Bella. Contrary to any speculation, Giano urges the people to remain armed, for he also, and I quote, desired Messer Corso to be punished, and he encouraged the people to go to the priors, the executive office of Florence, to complain about the case and to beg them to provide for it. The fact that Giano encourages an angry mob to remain armed already suggests that something out of the ordinary is going on. After all, if he truly believed in the effectiveness of the laws, why would he encourage the people to engage in violence and threaten the priors? Machiavelli underscores the collective mood of the people after meeting their champion. People, filled with indignation, felt they had been offended by the captain of the people, the judicial officer, but also, and most shockingly, abandoned by Giano della Bella. The reaction of the people in a radical tour de force contradicts Giano's advice. Rather than transforming indignation into legitimate demands, I quote, they went not to the priors, but to the captain of the people's palace, took it, and sacked it, thus simply giving an opportunity to the enemies of the laws to retaliate against them. The people's reaction in this episode simply contradicts their capacity to embrace the rule of law, to live according to the laws, and live securely, as Machiavelli had shown in the immediately preceding chapters. Given Giano's Republican and popular preferences, it is quite surprising that the people thoroughly dismiss his advice, even despite the fact they had requested it, and thus choose to take a course of action that directly damages the legitimacy of their popular government. Indeed, both Giano and the people would have immensely benefited had the people pursued their natural advocacy for the rule of law. Again, Machiavelli's account of the events complicates and even collapses this earlier characterization of noble and popular psychology. While the people are displayed as acting violently against the laws, the elites take a moderate course of action. As Machiavelli tells us, the heads of the nobility take advantage of the situation and accuse Giano before the captain of the people as the instigator of violent acts. So Machiavelli's narrative thus makes it rather clear that the nobles pursue their interests through legal channels while the people behave rashly and contrary to the desire to live according to the laws. With the accusation of Giano before the captain of the people, I quote, "People armed themselves and run to all of Giano's houses, offering him defense against the priors and his enemies." We notice here the reversal of roles from the people's first violent intervention. In the previous episode, the people took arms in order to defend the ordinances of justice and have this nobleman prosecuted. By the moment of Giano's indictment, the people rally in order to protect Giano against the lawful officials of the commune and the laws, or to prevent the very same laws Giano had created to punish him for the misbehavior of the people. And this is arguably paradoxical, which leads to the following question. If the natural desire of the people is to live according to the laws, then why do they hastily arm themselves and not, for instance, engage in deliberation or demand further to have the ordinances acknowledged and respected? The final paragraph of this section conveys Machiavelli's position relative to the people's acts. As he concludes, Giano della Vella decided to depart, to give way to envy, and to free the citizens from the fear they had of him, and to leave that city, which with his care and at his peril he had freed from the servitude of the powerful. He chose a voluntary exile. On the one hand, Giano chooses to leave Florence in order to deny his noble opponents the opportunity to retaliate against the people and him personally. On the other hand, Giano, who had put his status and life at risk to have the anti-noble laws recognized, saw the people as carriers of a potentially corrosive ethos of domination. As Machiavelli declares, and I quote, "Giano sought to deny his enemies the opportunity of injuring him and his friends," that is, the popular supporters, the opportunity of defending the patria, the fatherland. As Giano, unable to persuade the people from behaving impetuously, displays his skepticism. He feared, as Machiavelli says, the people's instability. Giano della Vella's conclusion regarding the people's inability to judge particular events are hardly attuned to Machiavelli's observations in the Discourses in Livy, that the people can be swayed from acting unfairly by a reasonable leader or a good man. Overall, this episode demonstrates that Machiavelli's descriptions of popular behavior evinces the people's inability to pursue legitimate modes of action, that is, to live according to the laws, and their outright opposition to any liberty-enhancing politics, attributes which Machiavelli presents in the famous introduction to Book 3. Let me now speak about the rise and fall of the Duke of Athens. Due to yet another disastrous military campaign against Pisa in 1341, we're told that the Florentine people accused of incompetence and rioted against those in charge of the military campaign, the so-called Office of the 20. Fearing for their political position, the governing party elects Walter de Brienne, the French-born Duke of Athens, first as protector and then as captain of their man-at-arms. Shortly thereafter, the nobles see in the Duke the opportunity to finally put to rest the increasingly popular demands. And so, as Machiavelli says, by putting themselves under a prince who, since his virtue was known to one party and his insolence to the other, might take one and reward the other. Of course, Machiavelli here notices that nobles, in their constant strive for domination, thought it better to ruin the city in order to put out the fire burning with them, which is arguably reference to the ethos of domination. At this point, Machiavelli begins to prefigure a much more nuanced and comprehensive vocabulary of the city's social sectors. As he tells us, the Duke puts himself to work and to increase his favor with the plebs, not the people, but the plebs. He prosecutes the 20 who had led the war against Pisa, killing some while condemning others to exile or fines. Significantly, the following chapter further refines this social classification in the context of the events. Machiavelli observes that these executions frightened the middle citizens, a term that was usually attributed to people or non-elite citizens, while they satisfied the grade and the plebs. We thus begin to notice how Machiavelli's late vocabulary of society refers to not two, but rather three distinct classes, the theme that links this episode to another episode, that is the revolt of the Ciompi and the political actions of the plebs in Book 3. In the midst of these events, the Duke demands the executive office to grant him the free lordship of the city, la señoría libera, for the whole city was consenting to it, so says the Duke. As the popular executive officers refused to accord the Duke the lordship of the city, and seeing that the Duke was sufficiently powerful to take it from them by force, the priors decide to speak to him. Here Machiavelli introduces a parallel between two speeches. The first one by an anonymous citizen who condemns the Duke. The anonymous citizen prophetically observes that no good that the Duke may confer to the city will be regarded as compensation for their loss of freedom, since his tyranny will make him so many enemies that it will be almost impossible to rule by force. Crucially, the anonymous speaker attempts to persuade the Duke by referring to the unpredictable and inconsistent behavior of the plebs. As he tells us, plebs in whom you trust will for any accident, though the slightest, reverse itself. In an arguably and Machiavellian fashion, the Duke of Athens rejects the Republican citizens' claims. He tells us he doesn't seek to enslave the city, but to restore its freedom. For divided cities are enslaved, and united ones are free. Seeing that they could do no farther good, the city's officials agreed to put the question of the city's lordship before the general population, so that the people would gather in General Assembly and make a decision about it. And this is where the crucial event happens. The following morning, the Duke's aspirations to the city's lordship is presented before the Florentines assembled in what's called Parlamento, or General Assembly. When the proposal about the Duke's temporary lordship was submitted to popular verdict, and I quote, "There was a shout from among the people, or life," which is then repeated by the assembled crowd, despite the attempt of one official to reason with them. Remarkably, while Machiavelli depicts the resistance of this official language of consensus, he categorically observes that, and I quote, "With the consent of the people, the Duke was elected Lord, not for 1 year, but in perpetuity." Machiavelli's reference to the people's consent at this crucial instance is all the more striking if we return to one of his sources for the section, Giovanni Villani's Cronica Fiorentina. Villani's detailed recount of the episode suggests that the group gathering in the piazza was a rather multifaceted one, and not simply, as Machiavelli refers vaguely, the people, or il popolo. Villani, his list includes the working plebs, or what's called the popolo minuto, as well as some noblemen, whom, according to Machiavelli, had been supportive of the Duke's rule. In that regard, there is a stark contrast between Machiavelli's general depictions of the people in his earlier texts, wherein the people is presented as a class, and certainly not as a general public, and always in opposition to terms such as great or nobles. So the question is Machiavelli here referring to the same social sectors as Giovanni Villani's? To return to the Duke's episode, the conclusion of this chapter speaks of his tyrannical behavior and the loss of the city's liberty. The palace of the Signoria of the Priors was sacked by the family of the Duke, the standard of the people torn apart, and the Duke's flag raised above the palace. As a result of this, General Assembly shows the people take in their own hands, irrespective of the decisions of the legitimate power of the city, the election of a foreign duke as Florence's perpetual leader. Contrary to the Discourses in Livy, the outcome of this episode shows how the people are unable to deal with specific political situations in a competent and effective manner. In the Discourses, Machiavelli suggests that the people are likely to be deceived in what he calls generalities, but they're certainly sound judges when it comes to particularities. They can judge, for instance, the ruler and the ruler's decisions wisely. By giving the people a distinct political voice in this event, Machiavelli suggests that they, like their noble counterparts, saw in the loss of the city's liberty a preferable alternative to engaging in or making the way through legitimate channels of political representation. Also worth noticing, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, is Machiavelli's reference to the language of popular consent. We're told that the Duke demanded the city's sovereign power because, first, the whole city was consenting to it, that he's elected as Lord in perpetuity with the consent of the people, and that the acts of the Duke are taken with great pleas by those, that is, the people who either in ignorance or out of wickedness had consented to them. Significantly, Machiavelli introduces the language of consent to moments in which individual figures, such as the Duke himself, gain political ascendancy to the detriment of the city's liberty. The most representative example of this is Lorenzo de' Medici's speech in the aftermath of the 1474 Pazzi conspiracy. With the exception of the Duke's episode, all other instances at which Machiavelli refers to consent pertain to the judgment of individual political authorities, calling to mind the connection between words and deeds. I'm going to bypass the chunky. this grounds, I have found clues that substantiate the so-called conservative turn in Machiavelli scholarship. It's been my attempt to show that the Florentine Histories offers a sustained revision of Machiavelli's earlier interpretation of Popolo's character and nature. Contrary to his earlier expositions, nowhere in the Histories do we find evidence that suggests that Machiavelli ascribes to the people the instrumental role of what he calls the guard of freedom. To the contrary, this episode, the ordinances of justice, the rise of the Duke of Athens, and the Champi uprising indicate a critique of the earlier positive characteristics of popular interests and agency. The Florentine people simply fails to live up to its natural desire to live according to the laws, shows preference for a tyrannical ruler over the city's freedom, relies on violence as opposed to legitimate modes of political activity, and presents a domineering ethos that replicates the desire of the upper groups. And so, contrary to Professor McCormick's interpretation, which contends that the accounts of the people contravene actual popular conduct in the text, I've suggested that the narrative of the people's behavior reinforces the vocabulary deployed by Machiavelli in the Florentine Histories. Additionally, Machiavelli's appeal to a language of Republican egalitarianism, whether wonderful or otherwise, doesn't embody an ancient conception of equality of political roles, whether as a Greek isonomia or disposition to rule and be ruled alternately, or the Roman legal jus ad equum, or equal access to offices. So contrary to neo-Republican assessments, Machiavelli can hardly be conceived as singing the old tune of civic virtue and the general disposition to pursue what is commonly beneficial to all the participants. For this late Machiavelli that I've just portrayed, the essence of wonderful equality lies in recognizing the existence, to put in Rousseau's words, partial societies that take precedence over, or rather overtake, any moral provision for a common vision of life. And Machiavelli's reference to the people's will as not to obey suggests that any long-term solution to the city's civil discords requires noble institutional means capable of satisfying the interests and characters of all parties. Put bluntly, the egalitarian quality of Florence, which Machiavelli's predecessors had seen and discussed with awe and reverence, now require new analytical prescriptions. Partial interests, this Rousseauian partial societies, have to be offered a clear set of political alternatives in order to be liberated from the temptation of monopolizing political power. We may thus say that Machiavelli's late political preferences pertain to a constitutional system of compromise and equilibrium in an attempt to legitimize the complex social makeup of actual Renaissance societies. Accordingly, virtue becomes less a sense of public spirit and more an ingenious artifice meant to turn partial desires into as common an interest as potentially feasible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mauricio, for that interesting and original look at Machiavelli. We always open up the forum right now to questions. I'm actually going to take Assistant Director's prerogative and ask you the first question. Do you think that some of the lack of clarity regarding the evolution of Machiavelli's thought is due in part to the popular image of him? I'm thinking of the way he's usually juxtaposed in a very negative light against Pico della Mirandola,
Right.
who was of an earlier period, but the idea that Pico della Mirandola had that unity could include what we would call pluralism today. And that in an earlier part of Machiavelli's thought, because I think you detailed this very well, unity was a bit more monolithic. I think as you detailed it, unity also becomes less monolithic for Machiavelli. Would that be correct? Or take it apart?
Actually, Machiavelli deprecates the idea of civic unity that was so typical among civic humanists, especially in the 15th century. The thought of Bruni or Bracciolini, and especially Bruni's conception of Rome as precisely this, monolithic republic and the pursuit of the common good. Machiavelli, rather, especially Machiavelli with Discourses, conceives of Rome as this chaotic order, right? Whereby precisely this clash between two different interests that he defines hypologically between the nobles and the people actually brings about a larger good. What I'm trying to get at with regard to the Florentine Histories is that this chaotic order is not a sound metaphor for what he sees in actual Renaissance societies. So that somewhat like forces him to, to reassess his own intellectual instruments and to, in a way, try to come up with novel ideas as to how to implement a republic in the Florentine context. And in that sense, I think, he's later thought it's much closer to what was usually referred to as, aristocratic republicanism of the time. So the late Machiavelli of the Florentine Histories becomes actually closer to, for instance, the political thought of Francesco Guicciardini, who was, the Republican aristocrat par excellence.
So it's not monolithic. Anyone? Any questions? So if we have no, go for it.
Thank you for talking. I found it very fascinating, and I've read Pocock's Machiavellian Moment, and as a student of 17th and 18th century Britain, I'm studying the period immediately after, quite a different context, but one theme that constantly comes up is disinterestedness. And I know Pocock speaks a lot about civic humanism, and your definition of virtue, I thought, or how Machiavelli's conception of virtue is very interesting, this attempt to convert partial interest into the common good, if I'm not mistaken. So how do you see your work revising Pocock's thesis? And,
right.
If you could maybe...
Right. So, like Pocock's Machiavellian Moments' main thesis is that civic humanism overall presents the public in opposition to the private, or civic virtue in opposition to corruption. Right? So all that matters in that conception of civic humanism is the pursuit of public participation, liberty of non-domination, equality, equal access to office, and the pursuit of the common good. Right? So any form of private activity that may interfere with the common good is conceived as the corruption of the common good. And Pocock simply tries to delineate the trajectory of this vocabulary over time and how it becomes somewhat transformed by the 17th century in England with this commonly referred to idea of the commercial republic. So in that sense, I see the late Machiavelli, the one that speaks of, in much more realistic terms of the excessive partial interests as being much closer to, 17th and 18th century English thinkers, and moving away from the context of 15th century civic humanism, and even of his own thought in the early 1510s.
It seems that Machiavelli has far less trust in the potential for virtuous people, as opposed to someone like James Harrington, who says if we had an agricultural society in which a society of small freeholders, right, this will produce a people who are capable of living freely.
Right.
It seems Machiavelli is not concerned with this, or is not addressing it.
He does address it, but he addresses it in like other late works that he composed around the same time that he was working on the Florentine Histories. They're mostly like templates for constitutional reform, and he certainly takes into consideration the fiscal and monetary interests of his Florentines, and the merchant ethos of Florentine society and therein. But what is, I think, most surprising about this late works of Machiavelli is how he simply rejects his own ideas concerning civic virtue, right, and the willingness of the citizen to become a member in the collective form of governance. By the time of the Florentine Histories, there is this sort of like sense of disinterestedness that he sees as mere monopolization of power in the public realm. Right? So in that sense, I see Machiavelli as thinking of virtue in constitutional ways as opposed to thinking of virtue in civic ways, as it was the case in the Discourses in Livy.
Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you all for coming. If you are not on our mailing list, please do sign up. We have the list at the back of the room on our table. Mauricio, that was fascinating, and thank you for making it clear that his thought was not monolithic, as it is often misinterpreted. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day. We hope to see you at future events.